the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control.
Ain't nothing changed, nothing new here to see. This ain't nothing but some political maneuvering. America, welcome to the eulogy, eat it up. It's called political buffoonery.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to This Week in DUMBmocracy, where we showcase some of the dumbest newsmakers of the week. Before we put the vice presidential debate fully in our rearview mirror, I want to revisit this exchange between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz concerning our most sacred of rights, the First Amendment.
But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
That is not the Supreme Court test. It was at one point the Supreme Court test when Schenck versus United States was the law of the land. But in 1969, there was a case called Brandenburg versus Ohio, in which a white supremacist leader was convicted for promising revengeance against the government in a speech before the media. Believe it or not, they actually covered this back in the late 60s, and before other supremacists. Supreme Court ruled that the clear and present danger test, the shouting fire in a crowded theater that Walz was mentioning, was to be replaced with a new test for unlawful incitement, because you could have lawful incitement, such as inciting people to take action, like writing your Congress member, like other things people on YouTube actually do on a daily basis. So, no, Tim Walz, you got it all wrong. That's not what free speech is all about, and unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else in between, the left has been getting free speech wrong for a long time now, to the point where we're seeing Democrats, very many of the old guard of Democrats, talking about things that were only whispered in hallways, about controlling narratives and controlling information.
What we see and hear, how we work, what we think, it's all about the information.
We're going to go through some of those recent remarks, specifically from Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. But before we get to all that, I'm going to ask you guys to please subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any other shows. And if you like what you're seeing here in this or any other video on the channel, smash that thumbs up button. Like, comment, share the show with your friends. All that really, really good stuff. Because all that's going to help us grow via the YouTube algorithm. As always, gang, thank you so much for all that you do to help grow the show, whether you're watching on the YouTubes, on the Rumbles, on the BitChutes, on the Odysseys, or on X. And if you want to help us grow the channel more, if you're a newbie, of course, I hope I earn your subscription, but also check out shop.buffoonoftheweek.com, where you can pick up some sweet merch like this Less Government, More Fun shirt. I wore a shirt similar to this over the weekend out to brunch with my family, and it got some conversations from just strangers walking up and saying, hey, that's a great slogan. And we got into talking a little bit. It was pretty cool. So shop.buffoonoftheweek.com for your Less Government, More Fun merch.
This guy is a grifter.
All right. Let's get back to the video. That Brandenburg case I talked to you about, involving a supremacist speaking to a crowd as protected speech, is where a lot of our First Amendment jurisprudence comes from. The First Amendment isn't about protecting just ho-hum speech that everybody agrees with. It's about protecting that offensive speech, the hateful speech that nobody wants to hear, because the majority view would be to suppress it. The courts are protecting it under the First Amendment. As odious it may be to someone, to their taste or to their own manner, that's not the test. And I think that's what we're seeing from the old school left recently in interviews that I'm going to show you right now. We're starting with Hillary Clinton, who over the weekend appeared on Michael Smerconish's show on CNN. And while she's not only showing off her Dr. Evil phase of fashion here that she's going through in her later life, she was also on the grind talking about her latest book. And while I respect the grift, Hillary Clinton uses this appearance as an opportunity to talk about limiting speech. Now, she does so by conflating a question offered by Smerconish right off the bat in this interview.
So I was happy to see you cite the work of Robert Putnam. Bowling alone made an impact on me. The discussion of social capital of the sort that I'm sure the Rodhams enjoyed in Park Ridge, right? Participation, belonging, volunteerism that is so missing today. You cite Jonathan Haidt, you cite Jean Twenge. Here's what disappoints me, and it's not about you, Madam Secretary. I'm shocked that no person, no Republican, no Democrat is championing this issue. The social science is so clear. The political science is so clear. Our fabric is frayed as a nation. Our kids are disconnected. Too much time behind closed doors on devices and not enough time replicating the experience of their parents and grandparents. So what do we do about it? What do we do about it for your grandkids?
Totally valid question, right? You see that Smerconish is focusing really on children and use of devices, less socialization in public, going out into the fresh air, touching grass, as they say. I see it in my own household with my 13-year-old nephew and my family. I see that when he comes home from school, he's immediately on his devices, hanging out with his friends, playing games online, not getting out as much as I would like him to, certainly. Perfectly valid question, especially when we're talking about the frayed nerves of our nation. The tribalism in our politics that is dividing our society as well can be a factor. But watch what Hillary Clinton does here in her response to a fairly innocent and quite valid question.
Well, Michael, there are people who are championing it, but it's been a long and difficult road to get anything done. Actually, we can look at the state of California, the state of New York. I think some other states have also taken action, but we need national action. And sadly, our Congress has been dysfunctional when it comes to addressing these threats to our children. So
now, this is interesting because I think Hillary Clinton is talking about the First Amendment here and talking about what Democrats love to talk about, the dissemination of misinformation, disinformation, whatever they want to call it these days. Information that they disagree with that 9 times out of 10 is opinion-based, not factually based. And she wants to stop that. She cites California, who created that crazy law against certain parody and memeing that we've seen using AI that everyone knows is parody or should know if they're reasonable. And that doesn't really protect our children so much. The question from Smerconish was about our next generation and how to get them back into socialization and out in the world away from social media. So why is she bringing up this law from California and laws from New York about disseminating misinformation, disinformation that they claim is going on out there, but really is thinly veiled suppression of our First Amendment rights?
So you're absolutely right. This should be at the top of every legislative political agenda. There should be a lot of things done. We should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave platforms on the internet immunity because they were thought to be just pass-throughs.
Let's be clear what Hillary Clinton is talking about. For those of you who don't know, she's talking about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, which protects platforms and service providers from being held liable for third-party content, with, of course, exceptions for criminality and intellectual property laws and things like that. Everyone's been calling for Section 230 reform. Hillary Clinton is saying get rid of it totally and replace it with something else and hold these platforms accountable for speech that people subjectively would not like on the internet. That, to me, is going too far the other way. It's actually suppression of thought and suppression of speech. I don't like that one bit.
They shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted. But we now know that that was an overly simple view, that if the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control. And it's not just the social and psychological effects, it's real harm. It's, child porn and threats of violence, things that are terribly dangerous. So,
by the way, just so Secretary Clinton knows, the dissemination of that sort of bad information concerning children, already illegal. It's already criminal to do it. The threats that she's talking about online, if it's threats of real harm, already criminal, already stopped by social media companies. She's conflating things that we know already are bad and are addressed as being real problems that aren't being addressed. Now, the application of rules maybe is too slow on some of these social media companies. Maybe they don't detect it quickly enough. I know that for sure, but I also remember Elon Musk talking about, at least on X, that he was taking swift action to deal with that. I don't hear it as much in the media as being an issue, but if it is an issue, it's in the application of the rules, regulations in conformity with our local laws and national laws, rather than an absence of censorship. In that sense, censorship is a good thing. It's needed. Certain acts like that we consider criminal should not be allowed and disseminated. That's a different thing than saying someone's opinion on a political issue or someone who is putting out information as facts that really are their opinion must be suppressed. It's totally wrong, in my opinion, to do that. I'll get to my opinion later on in the video, but needless to say, this, to me, is a direct attack on democracy, on the First Amendment.
I couldn't agree with you more. We need to remove the immunity from liability, and we need to have guardrails. We need regulation. We've conducted this big experiment on ourselves and particularly our kids, and I think the evidence is in that we've got to do more. Take phones out of schools. I'm so happy to see schools beginning to do that, where the kids turn their phone in when they walk in the door. And guess what, Michael? It won't surprise you because you're on this. Kids are paying better attention in class. They are talking to each other in the lunchroom, things that used to be part of your daily life when you were a child in school.
Again, Hillary Clinton conflating two different things. Taking away kids' phones and dealing with issues with minors is wholly different than repealing Section 230 and creating guardrails and reforms and regulations on speech in general. Let's be clear, they're two different things. We're dealing with adults in one respect and children in another. I am all for a school coming up with their own policy concerning devices in school. Some of them could be useful. Calculators in them, for example, are used in classrooms. But we're talking about adults when we're talking about Section 230. We're talking about social media companies who would then be responsible for liability based upon someone else's speech that is posted on there, that they had nothing to do with the creation of. Totally different here. And when you start talking about guardrails and regulations in government when it comes to speech, think about government and how divided it is now, and how government changes from party to party as power shifts every couple of years. No one's going to have any confidence in our laws to understand what the guardrails are, what the regulations are when it comes to this sort of speech. In my opinion, government should not be in the business of policing normal, everyday speech that is not criminalized. Hillary Clinton, completely off base here, but she's not the only one. Earlier in this year, in late September, John Kerry said this at the World Economic Forum.
And I think the dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. You can't, there's no, the referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact are kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree.
To me, this is a classic argument that has been a losing argument for hundreds of years. Whenever there is an advancement in communication that allows everyday people greater access to information. In 1501, in that time frame, you had Pope Alexander VI talking about excommunicating people for using the Gutenberg printing press without papal permission, mainly because it was taking scribes out of business that were employed by the church, many monks that would write up these manuscripts by hand, but also the church didn't want to lose control of the flow of information. You just heard Hillary Clinton say it in the previous clip.
If they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control.
They're worried about losing total control. The internet is just the latest advancement, and social media is a further advancement with that. Going forward, the same conversation is going to be had about AI as well. It's about the loss of information. John Kerry is decrying the loss of the referees of information because those who controlled the information controlled the people. He also is decrying the difficulty of democracy. By the way, constitutional republic, that's what we are, but that notwithstanding, yeah, representative democracy should be hard to do. It should be like herding cats, especially when everybody has equal access to information and can develop their opinions more thoroughly based upon the lines there are. Now, this creates bubbles, of course, as we've seen, but you have to break through those bubbles by coming to an agreement upon what the facts are. The marketplace of ideas will control what the information is that is accurate, that is not disinformation or misinformation. Frankly, a lot of this has been created by government itself from withholding information, by having partisans run things and give you shaded facts and alternative facts, as was coined by Kellyanne Conway back in like 2017 or whatever it was. There's a mistrust and a distrust out there of people who are now using the internet to find information that sometimes informs their bias, but also makes them more informed than any other society that has ever existed in human history. And that's what John Kerry and Hillary Clinton are really lamenting here. Their loss of control of the narrative. It's not about the First Amendment, it's about control.
And people go and that people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And you know, there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, you know, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, you know, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, you know, hammer it out of existence. So
the First Amendment is an obstacle. You're damn right it is. The First Amendment is an obstacle against tyranny. It's against the government suppressing their own people. You're damn right it's an obstacle. It's an intended obstacle. Our founders put it in place so that people like you, Mr. Kerry, couldn't stop Americans from deciding their own destiny, from charting their own course. And yes, along that way, it's a bumpy road. We all understand that. Representative government is advanced government. You have to really convince people to go your way. And in the 40 and 50 years that you were in government, the information was controlled by a small number of people in the government that people had no choice but to accept and to trust. But with the advancement of technology and with the flow of information happening more freely from many different outlets that are not controlled by the same people, the old guard that you were a part of, people are getting access to information that you don't want them to have, that is making it harder for you to control them. I say that's a very good thing. That is democracy. That is a representative republic. That is freedom. And while there may be bad actors out there who will spread misinformation and disinformation, sometimes even from mainstream outlets, as we've seen over the years, that gets sorted out in the free market of ideas when people can see consensus among ideas and can trust and rely upon multiple sources, whether it's left, right, center, indifferent, whatever it may be, that will then inform them their decision. The laziness is done. You are no longer guiding people by the nose to the goal that you have set. And the left is scared to death of this.
What we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change. Now, obviously, there are some people in our country who are prepared to implement change in other ways, and
so
that's really
questioning
dangerous.
Really if democracy can survive unregulated social media.
I think democracies are very challenged right now and have not proven they can move fast enough or big enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing. And to me, that is part of what this race, this election is all about. Will we break the fever in the United States?
Break the fever. Does that mean regain the narrative? It certainly seems that way because, as you'll see after the break, the candidates from the left on the Democrat side have a track record of being anti-free speech. Like what you see so far? Go ahead and smash that thumbs up button. Also, leave us a comment and tell us what you're thinking. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another show. The Democrat designee for president, Kamala Harris, has a long track record of being pro-suppression of speech by social media platforms, going back to the 2020 election and her first failed presidential bid. Here's just a couple of clips I found on the interwebs to illustrate her feelings on this.
But I guess the question about you I know you wrote to Twitter and the CEO, Jack Dorsey, and asked him to take away the president's Twitter handle, his account. How is that not a violation of free speech? I mean, the president has the same rights that you have, that I have, and how would that not just be a slippery slope where they have to ban, half of the people on Twitter?
I've heard that argument, but here's the thing, Jake. First of all, a corporation, which is what Twitter is, it does not have it has obligations, and in this case, Twitter has terms of use policy. And their terms of use dictate who receives the privilege of speaking on that platform and who does not. And Donald Trump has clearly violated the terms of use, and there should be a consequence for that, not to mention the fact that he has used his platform, being the President of the United States, in a way that has been about inciting fear and potentially inciting harm against a witness to what might be a crime against our country and our democracy. And for that reason, I do believe that it's clear that he has violated the terms of use, and I'm asking that Twitter does what it has done in previous occasions, which is to revoke someone's privilege because they've not lived up to the advantages of the privilege.
But that's not the only clip we have, folks.
All of these social media companies and these online platforms, which are so powerful in their ability to impact perception about an issue and to influence behaviors, let's be clear about that. There have to be standards, and he and his account should be taken down. We saw in El Paso that shooter in his manifesto was informed by how Donald Trump uses that platform. And this is a matter of corporate responsibility. Twitter should be held accountable and shut down that site. It is a matter of safety and corporate accountability.
Thank you. Senator Warren, you can respond.
So, look, I don't just want to push Donald Trump off Twitter. I want to push him out of the White House. That's our job.
Join me in saying that his Twitter account should be shut down.
No, let's figure out why it is that
he has lost his privileges and it should be taken down. And the bottom line is that you can't say that you have one rule for Facebook and you have a different rule for Twitter. The same rule has to apply, which is that there has to be a responsibility that is placed on these social media sites to understand their power. They are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation. And that has to stop.
We will hold social media platforms accountable for the hate infiltrating their platforms because they have a responsibility to help fight against this threat to our democracy. And if you profit off of hate, If you act as a megaphone for misinformation or cyber warfare, if you don't police your platforms, we are going to hold you accountable as a community.
There is not a part of you civically, constitutionally, that is concerned about the precedent of a private company taking the platform away from the President of the United States or some other elected official?
Free speech does not condone or protect threats to the safety of other human beings. And so that is what we are talking about. Like, let's be really clear.
Even her running mate, Tim Walz, who you saw in the first clip, still spreads that old canard about hate speech and misinformation and disinformation as grounds for suppressing free speech.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
The evidence is pretty clear, don't you think? The Democrats in this ticket are anti-First Amendment. They're going to come after your right to say and think and believe whatever it is that you want to that is legal and right according to our laws. But in editing this video, I realized I missed something. Going back to what John Kerry was saying earlier, he said a phrase.
I think democracies are very challenged right now and have not proven they can move fast enough or big enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing. And to me, that is part of what this race, this election is all about. Will we break the fever in the United States?
And I happened to notice Hillary Clinton said the exact same thing at the end of her interview with Michael Smerconish.
Because I think if you're going to be an involved citizen, you have to pay attention to what's going on. And we have to be focused on this election. We have to understand what's at stake. But to finally add to what you said, we've got to get back to being a community again. Having people interact with each other, find common ground together. So hopefully the election will turn out the right way. The fever will be broken.
Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
And we can go back to trying to put our families and our communities on the right track.
It's interesting that they all talk about threat to democracy in the context of speech they don't like. Misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, whatever they want to call it. People's opinions they disagree with, for the most part. That covers the whole rubric of what they think is misinformation and disinformation and hateful speech and all of that. The way we protect speech in this nation is by looking at the speech we hate the most, that we think is odious, that we think is disgusting, that we disagree with wholeheartedly, and protect that speech from the tyranny of the majority. That's what Brandenburg is all about. That's why the law changed over time from the clear and present danger test of Schenck to Brandenburg. And that's the battle we see waging to this day. But it's all in the guise of the First Amendment when the real issue is about controlling narratives and controlling the flow of information. Democrats want to go backwards to a time where they controlled the flow of information because they had all the information. The privileged few in government or that were in mainstream media, they had the information and they gave you what they wanted you to hear. They cut up sound bites that made things sound good. They didn't allow you to get to the primary sources that they had access to because there was no way for someone in California to go to Washington without traveling there to see exactly what was in the nitty-gritty of the details. And when the internet came about and we started to get access to this information and became the most informed society to the point where we have the world's knowledge in our phones, carried around with us at all times, that's when they got scared. That's when they got scared of people using that power to research and find information, to uncover ideas and facts that formed opinions that were against their narrative. Elections are about narrative. So when you hear John Kerry and Hillary Clinton talking about breaking the fever, it's about making sure their narrative wins. And the way that they want to do it is have two candidates, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who are believing the same things they believe, that information suppression is the way to stop threats to democracy. Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, is an even bigger threat to democracy than what they claim to be protecting us from.
That's great.
But listen, that's just my opinion on all this. Let me know what you think. Let's get into the comments together. And as always, like and share the show with your friends, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the show. Check out the merch at shop.buffoonoftheweek.com. Pick up some less government, more fun stuff. They're really great conversation starters. I'll see you guys in the comments later today discussing this video and all the other shenanigans and buffoonery happening every day this week in DUMBmocracy.
All views and opinions expressed here are not necessarily of the mainstream media and may offend some listeners. It's called political buffoonery.